Dunfermline Athletics East End Park welcomed two special guests in the run-up to the Scottish election, and as the media gathered, the star attractions headed onto the pitch before facing a question and answer session with a cross-party mix of local voters. It turned out to be a close, personal and friendly event. Ed Miliband and Iain Gray, Scottish Labour Leader, came to Dunfermline to support Labour candidate Alex Rowley.
I've known Alex for 15 years. And I know he is somebody of deep values and passion about not just politics, but about people and about improving people's lives. He came into politics for the right reasons: social justice, equality, and making people's lives better. And I know that as a member of the Scottish Parliament, he would work his heart out to put those values into practice for the people of Dunfermline.
I thought that the question and answer session went very well. You know, there was no planted questions. People were invited along who were Labour supporters, people who were thinking about who to vote for. And I think, you know, Ed Miliband set it out very clear. The Liberals at the general election made a lot of promises, they've broke them all. The SNP at the last Scottish election made a lot of promises and broke them. The only party that you can trust is the Labour Party, and hopefully people will have gone away today knowing that in Iain Gray they would have a First Minister who would deliver on his promises and wouldn't break promises.
100 guests gathered at the home of Dunfermline Athletic and were invited to put their questions to the Labour leaders.
I believe that in any election campaign, it is not politicians who decide what the election is about, it is the voters who decide what are the issues that matter. What the people want to see is a government in Holyrood which will fight every day for the things that really matter to them. On top of that agenda for everyone is jobs, getting the economy growing again, and more than anything else, opportunities for our young people. Many people in Fife and elsewhere remember the last recession, the last time we had cuts, the last time the Tories were in power back in the 80s, and how youth unemployment became a scourge that it took us many years to get rid of.
And you know, I think it's a very simple question at this election. And that's a question that you all have to decide, which is who can best stand up for Scotland when you have a Conservative-led government in London? Because we all remember the 1980s, we remember the poll tax, we remember the way that the Conservatives, in my view, divided the country. At that point, there wasn't a Scottish Parliament. I'm not going to leave young people on the scrap heap. I'm not going to accept a situation where 40,000 young people in Scotland are out of work. I'm going to pledge to abolish youth unemployment in the course of this Parliament. Now, I want to say to people who voted Liberal Democrat at the last general election, I totally respect the choice that you made. You made the choice for genuine reasons, because you thought that it was going to be a real alternative. You believed Nick Clegg when he said, I'll stand up for young people, I'll stand up for fairness, equality and social justice. I have to say to you, I believe that Nick Clegg, by his actions, has led the Liberal Democrats to support a government which is doing precisely the opposite of what he promised at the election. What's your name, sorry?
Beryl.
Hello. What's your name, sir?
Oh, it's Tom Leatherland. I fully support the large-scale development of renewable energy, especially offshore wind and tidal. We desperately need the jobs that this should bring, but it will require big capital investment. And my question is, who will fund this investment and how will we eventually pay for it?
But what we can do to encourage it is smaller scale investment to make it work. So investment in construction facilities, constructing the turbines, yes, and most importantly, continuing with the fund which was set up by the existing government, quite correctly, to support the development of port facilities for both construction and maintenance of those projects. So I think the trick for government is to find the affordable investments which will then make the bigger investments much more possible.
There are huge job opportunities in renewables. and it's not just a climate change issue, it's an economic issue as well. Okay, I hope there's not another one of you're not related to those two, are you? Okay, thank goodness for that. We're going to take them in groups of 3 so you can think of what his answer is. There's a gentleman next to you. I don't know whether you've got the same question or an even more complicated one.
And the questions kept coming on jobs, the public sector, and of course,
had benefited from a free education.
That we will not introduce tuition fees for students either before or after graduation.
That youth employment is a huge problem and big in this area. Cutting the funding for further education is not helpful, I think. And young people are being let down on all fronts.
And one of our core policies to deliver apprenticeships actually is to take big companies like Babcock or BAE who run apprenticeship schemes every day of every week and partner them with small businesses or sole traders who might be able to take an apprentice on but don't want the paperwork, don't want the risk, they're a bit worried about what it means for them in health and safety, all of that.
Kirsty Horn, I want to take you back to the idea of this avoiding another lost generation, which for me is not just about work, it's not just about unemployment for Scotland's young people. 1 in 10 young people in Scotland are now prescribed antidepressants. That speaks to me of far bigger challenges than just economic ones. And I want to know what both of you have to say on addressing those broader issues and looking at people not just as economic contributors, but as the sort of Scots that we want for a 21st century.
Do you work in that area, Kirsty?
I do indeed.
Go on, give us your sort of 1 minute or half a minute answer.
My half a minute answer is we need to have a different narrative.
In the 80s, when that lost generation happened, I was a teacher. I was a teacher in a school in Edinburgh, Gracemount. A lot of the kids came from quite difficult backgrounds, but they were, as you would expect kids to be, optimistic, full of energy, full of life, full of hope. And I taught there for a few years, and then I went away. I taught in Africa for a couple of years, and I came back. And in the intervening 2 years, in the early 80s, the school had changed completely because the kids had changed completely. All the hope had gone, all the optimism had gone, and even the best of them really felt there was no point trying. And it was because they believed by then that they would never get a job, that society didn't want them, and whatever they did, it wasn't going to make any difference. And to be honest, things got much worse after that in Edinburgh, because then heroin came, and it really was, for many of them, a generation that they didn't survive. Many of these kids didn't make it out their 20s. So I do think work and the idea that there's going to be a job and opportunity is actually quite important. It is an important thing. But I think you make a fair point about not treating people as economic units. And I think there's a big question that politicians need to stop shying away from, and that is this. If we are materially better off than we've ever been, and we are, generally, this is a tough time, but we are generally better off materially, why are so many people suffering from stress, from depression? Why do so many young men in particular in Scotland kill themselves? And I don't think we've really even started talking about those questions. And I guess it takes those kind of questions take us into areas that politicians and others find a bit uncomfortable. And there are no easy answers. And I do think it is about people feeling alienated from their communities, their societies, their neighbourhoods, their families. And I don't have an answer to your question, but what I'm saying to you is, I think it's about time politics and politicians started at least talking about it.
Very good answer.
If I'm First Minister, I will spend all of every day of every week working to deliver that pledge to get rid of youth unemployment and create 250,000 jobs. If Alex Salmond is First Minister, he will spend most of his days again trying to bring forward a referendum on independence, which nobody wants, and which he knows absolutely fine if he did have it, people would vote no in. And all the time that he's doing that, what will happen? The same thing will happen that has happened in the past 4 years. 4 years ago, Scotland had the lowest unemployment anywhere in Britain. Now it's got some of the highest unemployment anywhere in Britain. How did that happen? It happened because they took teachers out of our schools, they cancelled projects like the rail link to the airport that would have created thousands of jobs, and they stopped building schools and hospitals. What were they doing? They were having a national conversation on independence and trying to get a referendum forward. So that's the difference. But here's the real difference. The SNP copy Labour's policies because they want people to think they're a left-of-centre social democratic party. Alex Salmond is not a social democrat. This is the man who said, Scotland didn't mind Margaret Thatcher's economics, we just didn't like her social policy. Right? If you think Scotland didn't mind Margaret Thatcher's economics, you are no kind of social democrat, and you are not the kind of person that we need as our First Minister in the next few years.
Hello, I'm Gary Haldane, I'm a postman in Dunfermline.
What's being done for the reputation of the public sector?
You should make it one of your candidates.
The other thing is, when you're talking about education and teachers and the SNP cutting teachers, what do you think my job prospects are going to be this year?
Let's go out and work as hard as we can to elect Alex Rowley as the new MSP and to elect Iain Gray as First Minister. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Listen, half the problems
I was delighted that Ed Miliband came along with Iain Gray to Dunfermline today and set out very clearly what Labour's agenda is for a Scottish Parliament. I think, in Iain Gray we see that we would have a First Minister who would spend all his time every day working hard to deliver jobs and deliver on his agenda and an agenda for the people of Scotland. And Ed Miliband, we have a leader of the Labour Party who is absolutely committed to fairness and social justice, and I was delighted to welcome him here today to Dunfermline.
I think people know that this is a really important election, and they know this is an opportunity to send a message to the Conservative-led government in London, but also to elect people like Alex Rowley to be the members of the Scottish Parliament. And Scottish Labour is offering a real alternative to what the government in London is offering, a real alternative on apprenticeships, on jobs, on the living wage, all the kind of things that Alex has fought for all his political life.